have you. I heard a few people say this is your first time here. Welcome. We are a language and cultural center. So as you can see, we have a French language library, we have a gallery space that wraps around the building, we have an exterior gallery space and event space. So we kind of stay busy with events. Last year we did over 100 cultural events, and not just limited to the French language, although that is the glue, but we try to not be exclusive, especially here in Louisiana where people have French heritage, Creole heritage, Cajun heritage, and may have lost the language. So that's a little bit about us. I did want to call attention today is Give NOLA Day. So we do have some papers, some QR codes. If you can give, it really, really helps us. We are a nonprofit and dependent on sponsorships and fundraising from generous community members. Also coming up, and my director Emily just handed out, we have our La Soirée. It's going to be an honorary gala. We're celebrating 40 years of French language, heritage, culture, and community right here in this building. So this year we've done a big work between the staff and the board members to reconnect with the founders and those who saved the building after Katrina and saved the nonprofit. Yeah. So people had, we lost a lot of archives, of course. We got some seats up front for y'all.
Something like
I'm going to put these on the back tables. I was just saying it's Give NOLA Day. We're a nonprofit. Thank you for being here. We're a language and cultural center. We do quite a good bit of cultural and community activities, over 100 last year. But coming up, we are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, so we have a lovely honorary gala to reconnect with our founders. And it's been very exciting. Found archives. We've been working with the HNOC. We're going to be hosting it at the Cabildo. So really, really trying to rassembler, get everyone together to celebrate, the great work that's been invested into this organization. So that's a little bit about us. Tune in to social media, follow us, or sign up for our newsletter to stay tuned for all of these many, many wonderful opportunities. We will also start our next session of French courses in June. Our open house will be June 6th, 5, June 5th, Wednesday, June 5th. So it's a really great time to come in if you're interested. We'll have staff on site doing placement tests and helping you figure out what's the best fit for your level, your time, and your budget. So that is us. Without further ado, tonight we welcome Ms. Miki Pfeffer, who is a wonderful writer, independent researcher, and female author who has published several fantastic books that are for sale at the back table. And I will let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, how's the sound here?
Pretty good.
Turn it on.
Good. Oh, how did we get there? Let's see. Oh. We need the PowerPoint now. Is this good?
Yes. Yes.
I hear myself. Okay. Well, thank you for being here. It's a real treat for me to carry on a particular program that happened here last year that I'll be talking about. Thank you to the Alliance Française for the opportunity to tell you about a little serendipitous meeting that grew to make a larger impact, to expand an important family's history of itself. I found Grace King papers in this reading room at LSU when I was researching my first book on the women's department at the Cotton Centennial. And she was so fascinating to me that I went back and started transcribing more of her letters. And later I uncovered about 60 letters that were written by the Baron de Pontalba to her between 1901 and 1921. His letters had been sitting in the archives, unknown to the family Pontalba and to probably most other people, except the archivist and me, I think. So, how many of you were here last August when Pierre spoke from the archives at Montlevec? Okay, all right.
I wondered too, has anyone been to the Chateau Pontalba in France?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Okay, lucky people. In it, if you remember, and you might not, he mentioned that I had passed on some letters to him, and they had filled in missing parts of his family's history, which I didn't know. That's what I was giving him. So I was thrilled that it made a difference in his archive. See, in that event, he was showing various archival artifacts and documents. So more appropriate title for this talk might be From NOLA to Montlevec. This one is Montlevec to NOLA. Tonight I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. It's still a work in progress. In 2019, after the exhibit for the tricentennial event at the Cabildo, I went to a meeting of the Louisiana Historical Society, of which I'm a member, and I sat up front, and someone in the back introduced his guest for the evening, and he said it was Pierre de Pontalba, but I didn't turn around to look to see who it was because I didn't want to be rude. But during the refreshment time, I noticed this tall young man who looked French. So I said, "Are you Pierre?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him that I had these letters scanned from the Baron de Pontalba, and that I would put them on a USB and give them to him. So we met, and I brought that to him, and as soon as he plugged them in and started glancing over them, he got excited. So I got excited too. And he said it was his, I think it was great-great-uncle, maybe great-uncle, but I think great-great-uncle. So how and why did I have them? Well, I'll go back here. How and why did I have them? As I said, I had been transcribing the letters of Grace King. I'll put her up here. The letters aren't digitized at LSU. There's no plan to do so. And even the inventory of the letters is very sketchy and hard to make out. So it's my mission to transcribe all of the letters. And because I'm doing this thing where I'm just transcribing the letters without a specific research subject, I come across all kinds of letters that fall together, and this group of Pontalba letters was one of them. I don't read French, so I could only tell from the letters what I could see that they were recounting a family history. So who was Grace King, to whom the Baron wrote? She was a writer, a local writer, historian, genealogist, and more. The left photo is when she first began writing in 1885 because of the Cotton Centennial Exposition, where she met some editors. And the right photo is probably the way she looked during early exchanges with Pontalba. These are some of her books. Memoir, Memories of a Southern Woman of Letters. She wrote a textbook, The History of Louisiana, and other books. one of her best known is New Orleans, the place and the people. People still find that attractive and informative about the city. But why was the Baron writing to Grace King? It appears that she first wrote to him in her capacity as secretary of the Louisiana Historical Society, probably at the behest of the president of the organization. They were no doubt asking him for documents that he might add to the society's growing archives. That first letter began a long correspondence that became increasingly endearing. They became friends, you can tell, in the letters as they go. Even I, a non-French reading person, can tell that they get more endearing. And Grace's letters to the Baron are undiscovered. They're not in her papers. And Pierre has looked for them in the archives at Montlevec and hasn't found them yet, but there's always hope. The Louisiana Historical Society began in 1836. The state legislature approved it in 1860 because colonial French and Spanish documents, a lot of them had been taken away when the transfer of Louisiana from Napoleon to the United States. There were documents that went back to France and back to Spain, and documents that were stashed away in boxes that nobody knew what was in there. They had been sealed and they were moved around in all kinds of places. So by this organization was intent on gathering those documents. The organization was rechartered in 1877 after a 17-year hiatus, and their object was the collecting and preserving of facts, documents, records, and memorials relating to the national, aboriginal, and civil history of the state. And they still gather documents. The gathered documents were moved around many times. Philanthropist William Radcliffe Irby, when he learned of the work of the society, provided money for them, for documents to be translated and cataloged. He gave $15,000, and they would be in annual installments. But his insistence was that the attorney, Henry Plocher Dart, would oversee the translating and documenting and organizing of those documents. And Alcée Fortier was president of LHS in 1894, and Grace King was the perpetual secretary of the society. Years and years and years. And she and Henry Dart worked on the quarterly that the organization produced, and they would, in many of the issues, tell what documents had been translated and what the progress was. It was an ongoing project. And once William Irby willed the Lower Pontalba to the Louisiana State Museum, the archives, the Society's archives, found a permanent home. They found, I'm thinking it might be like the 1850 house, that kind of space. They could put their documents there. The society did get a chance to move them into the Cabildo in 1909 when the Supreme Court was built, because before that the Supreme Court was held in the Cabildo. So who was this Pontalba in 1901 that Grace King wrote to. His dates are 1839 to 1918. His grandmother was the Baroness. Her father, you know, was Unbeknownst. Her husband was Celestine Tantin, they called him, I think. And the son was Joseph, and then the letters that the Baron wrote to Grace King were from the grandson there, Celestine George Edouard Baron Delfo Pontalba. And the Pontalbas had been in New Orleans at least since Bienville's time. He began to tell her the history. 1732, as early as that, his forebears were in New Orleans. That's a Pontalba. I think that's before Unbeknownst. Okay, so here's the first letter that Grace King received from the Baron, and Jean is going to read it in French, since I wouldn't insult you by trying to read it myself.
Also, with apologies to the native speakers here, there are a couple of words I can't quite interpret, but... Chère Madame, vous m'avez demandé de vous envoyer une note mentionnant les documents que je pourrais posséder ou connaître concernant ma famille et sera attachant à l'histoire de la Louisiane. Quoique mon bagage soit bien léger, je vous adresse quelque chose. Par expérience que le fait le plus insignifiant en apparence peut quelquefois avoir de l'importance pour les recherches, à la condition que son authenticité soit certaine. Voici en gros mon inventaire. Here's my...
Thank you. So, for us non-speakers, this is the translation that I made. Dear Madam, you have asked me to send you a note mentioning the documents that I may be able to find or know concerning my family and the history of Louisiana. Although my something is very light, I confess to you from experience that the most apparently insignificant fact may sometimes be of importance to research, provided its authenticity is certain. I feel like that's what happened with Pierre and me, that we met and these little letters that I had scanned made a difference for him. And then he begins to tell his family's history in raw terms, starting with Jean-Joseph in 1732. There are 2 pages in between this first page and last page. And the last paragraph is, if these documents may be of interest to the person to whom you wish to make them known, who you have told me is concerned with Louisiana, I shall be happy to have provided a stone to the edifice. I love that. And he will always find me disposed to give him precise details of all that I have outlined in broad strokes. Please accept, dear Madam, the expression of my affectionate tribute, Pontalba. He always signed them Pontalba. Note he calls her Madam. He doesn't know her, obviously, because she was unmarried. So later he switches to Mademoiselle. And he refers to someone who obviously has prompted the request. So I'm assuming that it's the president of the society who would have asked Grace King to begin that correspondence. Apparently, she was fluent in French, but it took her many months to finally get around to the letter because she worried to her sister in August, the year before, saying, I must now make a third attempt to write in French to the Baron Pontalba. The struggles I have with particle passé, I must take French lessons next winter. So finally in 1906, they meet at last. Grace King was in Meudon, which is a suburb of Paris. She was nursing a woman friend, writer. And so she says, Baron Edouard called on Friday. I thought he was a very old man. He is not. Only 68. She was 44 at the time. Does not look 60. Is not very good looking. Was so cordial, unaffected, so glad to make my acquaintance at last that I quite fell in love with him. Of course, we had a great deal to say about Louisiana history and old Louisiana families. He said he would come very soon again, and went off in his fur overcoat, I forgot to put over in there, trudging through a heavy snow, much more like an Englishman than a Frenchman. It's such a sweet letter that she writes to her sister. So they talked of old Louisiana families, which might probably sparked her later book of the Creole families of New Orleans. You see chapter 6 there is Pontalba. And this is what she writes about them. In heart and mind, true to ancestral attachments, Edouard de Pontalba ever responded to the name of the state as to a watchword, and fortunate was the one able thus to invoke his kindly interest and enjoy his unforgettable generosity of mind and hospitality of board. So she must have eaten with him at some point. In the progress of further elucidation of political questions and personal appreciations, he penetrated into the family archives of Montlevec, where finding the letters from which we had quoted of his distinguished and unfortunate great-grandfather written to his wife. She quotes a lot of letters from his journals. So she goes on to tell when he returned after the war, the First World War, he was broken in health, and his beautiful summer home at Senlis lay in the path of the Prussian army. He did not live to see the compensation of victory. He died early during the winter of 1919 in Paris, at the home of his daughter, his only child, calls herself Pontalba Co. And she mentions his granddaughters too. So, let's see, where am I? This slide is already obsolete because when I sent it to Carla, I still haven't found the letters from 1914 to 1921, from the Baron, when the war was on. He told her about what was happening in the war, and also the letters from Pontalba Co. I have sent him these last letters, and he's thrilled. And to close out his story, here's what his daughter wrote to Grace King. She writes in English. October 10th, 1918, I'm sorry to tell you my father passed away on the 21st of August. After a very sad winter, very painful, with all kind of misery brought by old age, my father died slowly in my arms. We came here in my summer house with mother and daughters for a change of air, and now going back to Paris. We are so sad to think that my father is no more there to rejoice all those wonderful and good news. It was his only wish to live and see the end of this big war. His last pleasure was to see our American cousin, Monsieur Miltenberger, when he came over to France, and to see in my house in Paris all your splendid men coming to help us, deliver us from those hideous barbarians. Excuse my bad English writing. Sincerely yours, Pontalba Cull. So, through me, through LSU, that's the Hill Library where the Grace King papers are lodged, passing through my hands to the Baron and his wife and Pierre, and then to Montleveille, a completion of a circle. So, thank you very much. Yes.
Interestingly enough, just this week at, I think it's Crescent City auction, some of the Milton Berger, they pronounce it.
Milton Berger.
I didn't know it was related to the Pontalbas, or they're up for auction.
Oh, interesting.
And there's lots of, Captiville, it's the same, I know someone who was related to him, and she was still alive a couple of years ago, and she was already 100.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if, I keep looking for her name, I haven't seen that she died, it must have been from her estate. Because she was, her grandfather, whatever, or great-grandfather was Paul Captiville, former mayor, and she was Milton Berger, but I did not know they were.
Milton Berger.
That's
It
how
is
she
a
pronounced
German
it.
name.
I know,
It's
that's how she would say it.
Milton Berger, but
Milton
Milton Berger.
That's how
Well,
she
we
would
do
say it.
change German names into French around here. So can't do anything with my name, Pfeffer though. Yes.
So I'm curious if Pierre felt like any of this wonderful detail that you were able to give to him would change anything in Christina Vella's book.
In what?
Christina Vella, who wrote
Oh, Christina Vella.
Intimate Enemies.
We didn't even, I don't know, we didn't even talk about that. I know she was a very, very careful researcher. If she couldn't find more than one source, she didn't put it in her book unless she indicated she was speculating. And it's a wonderful book.
Intimate Enemies.
Thank you,
It's her
Intimate
by
Enemies
Pontalba's biography.
by Christina Vella. Yes, I don't know, he didn't say that, but he was really pleased. And I was thrilled that he thought I had added to the family history, simply by scanning letters and knowing that they were there. And our serendipitous meeting.
When we were in Montleveille, and I had just all these documents just spread out. I mean, I have pictures of some documents that were from the 1400s.
Yeah.
So on the other side of the family, not the Pontalba side, they have like copies of marriage documents, dowry arrangements. So they have their history, he has their history like going back to the 1400s.
But also, they have Miro papers.
Yes.
Governor Miro's
Right, he was.
wife was.
Yeah, right.
And so she talk about things that left New Orleans when the Spanish left. She brought papers to Montleveille, or to France, and they're now at Montleveille.
Mm-hmm.
But also another, and we were able to look through some of that, but they have so many things, it's amazing. And also, an uncle would have, I think, been after this generation, maybe a great uncle or something, that had a lot of information, and someone took it away from the chateau. Do you remember the end? It wound up, they don't know whatever happened to it. His house eventually burned, and they don't know, that it was never accounted for, so who knows what was in that. There's a lot, a good deal was lost there. Because he was gonna ostensibly write up the family
It's
history. and all that.
amazing that anything is left. I mean,
I know.
I understand it at Grace King's Letters, they moved from rental house to rental house. You know, we have roaches and
Right.
all kinds of
Mildew,
buggies here, and yet the letters,
Survive.
yeah, they survived. Grace King does quote in the Creole Families of New Orleans from the journal that Mrs. Nero kept a journal, and she quotes many pages of the journal, yeah. Now Pierre is not the direct descendant from this Baron. When he died, I think his only son had died in the war maybe. And so it moved to his half-brother, his father's second wife, the son of his father's second wife. And that's the line that Pierre is in. Yeah. We talk about Pierre like, you know, we know him. We kind of do, but we like that. Yeah.
I want to know, does Pierre have children? Does he have siblings? Like, is he the end of the road?
He has siblings, but he's not married.
He has 6 brothers and sisters.
And do any of them have children? And the old kids? Because I'm wondering, what happens after
Yeah.
this generation? What happens next?
He's kind of taken over the family history stuff. His parents, the Baron and Baroness, actually live in the south of France. She's from the south of France. Montlevec is cold. There's very little heat. It's very, very old fashioned. And she lived there when the children were younger, but then she prevailed on her husband to go back to the south. She said when she moved in, she told me this, and I have pictures of the floor. It's a beautiful parquet floor in the main dining room. She said when she and her husband moved in there was so much water because the roof was leaking so bad. And that the way she got her exercise the first couple of years they were married is she put they got the water out, she put sandpaper on her shoes, and she went skating around on the floor to smooth it out. She had some stories. She had 6 children, and then they adopted a son who is special needs, who's from Morocco, I think, isn't he? Yeah, and he doesn't live with them, but an amazing family. And so 2 older brothers, one's in Australia, one is that came to our deal. He's a nuclear engineer in the south of France.
How old are these people?
20s and 30s.
Okay, so young enough.
And the one sister is in Paris, and she's married, and she has the 2 grandchildren.
And are they interested in history and archives?
Only Pierre, and the others maybe now are starting to.
Marie
but
is a librarian, and I know she's interested.
Pierre was the one
Pierre's
who really
the main one.
started delving.
That's always the concern, that
Yeah.
when the people who are the most interested die, and then who's left to take over, and if no one does it, then it just ends with them, and then what happens? You have to rely on books, rather than having first-hand accounts.
Yeah.
We have to just rely on whatever's in the archives and libraries. And I'm always curious about families.
And the Montlevec is in such bad shape. They just don't have money anymore.
And too, just one note on the architecture, it wasn't a great building to begin with,
No.
and that was something really interesting to see. I was able to visit in the winter, and it was cold,
Yeah.
and Pierre was pointing out, look at this looks nice. No, it's peeling because it's not real. They really went cheap, it was new money. It's a great example of faux neo-Gothic, very cheap materials. It's a very interesting place to visit, but it's all facade. And
Now that's so interesting, because where did you and I visit in New England a couple of years ago? I think we even commented, we tend to comment on some of these buildings that seem to last for generation after generation, and then you hear a story like this where the house is probably not gonna last, but we've seen so many that have survived for generation after generation.
But it takes a great deal of money to keep up these castles, for sure.
Yes.
That's why
Right.
people open them to the public, and they invite film companies like Downton Abbey, the show, was filmed in one of the castles. Anyone else? Question, comments? Yes.
I was curious, what are your next steps? How are you, next steps?
Next up,
Yeah, next steps.
Next
Next
step.
Next step.
projects, are you
Steps.
publishing a new book?
well,
What's next for you?
my mission is ongoing to transcribe all of the letters of Grace King. And I would love for her letters to be published, but it would take about 6 volumes, and she's not important enough for a publisher to take that much expense on for her. LSU did my second book with Grace King's letters to and from Mark Twain. So right now I'm just doing little pieces like this that come up. I talked about the Louisiana lottery, defeating the Louisiana lottery, and how the King family was involved in that. So eventually it might become a book that is topical, focuses on various topics, but thanks for asking. Yes, Bonnie?
When you transcribe them, do you also translate them?
Well, Grace King, no, I don't translate. Grace King's letters are in English.
Thank goodness.
But there are a lot of letters from various friends, more than the Baron. And what I read there from his first letter, I translated on my computer. And I could figure out the words. He has a neat handwriting, so that's how I managed to figure out what he was saying. I can get the gist of it. I can, read enough to tell, but I can't get every word. And there are about 60 letters altogether of the Baron. So it's a nice chunk of letters. And some of them are 8 pages, some of them are postcards, but fascinating. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I was just gonna say, I feel too the need to say if anyone is traveling to France this summer, we do have 2 options to learn French for travel, a multi-week course and also a quick workshop. And then if anyone would like to purchase books, this Miki can be in the back.
I'm sure you can sign some. You can sign them.
Yes, I have just a few. I have two of these from the Women's Department of the Cotton Centennial, about half a dozen of these. So these are 25 and this is 50. So I'd be glad to. Yeah, to do that.
And none of this is, no one lives in any of these, in this.
Here's what I meant.
He